YouTube, and so everything after this should be live.
Okay, great. Thanks, David. Hello, everyone. I'm Mary Jones. I serve as chair of the Kansas Behavioral Sciences Regulatory Board. I ask members of the board to respond to a roll call to signify their presence at this open meeting that's being conducted remotely by conference call or electronic medium. Dave Anderson.
Present.
Jill Plessing.
Oh, crap.
Linda Heitzman Powell.
Present.
Present, sorry.
I got you, Jill. It's fine. Donna Hornick-Wall.
Present.
Jim Kilmartin.
Present.
Jacqueline Lightcap.
Here.
Richard Nobles.
Present.
Andrea Padroma Morales.
Present.
Cynthia Schindel.
Here.
Laura Shaughnessy.
Present.
David Stevens.
Present.
I note the following staff members are also present. David Fye.
Here.
Leslie Allen.
Here.
And Cindy Durkle.
Here.
Tim Resner, serving as legal counsel for the board, is also present. And next, David Fye will read a message concerning this meeting being held remotely.
Thank you, Mary. This is Dave Fye, Executive Director for the Behavioral Sciences Regulatory Board. Public comment allows the public to address the advisory committee about its concerns, but the Kansas Open Meeting Act, or KOMA, does not require the board to provide public comment or answer questions from individuals. Individuals requesting to provide public comment could contact the Executive Director prior to the meeting by sending an email to david.fye@ks.gov. The board has approved time for public comment to one individual today, and they will be speaking concerning the bill concerning the Social Work Multi-State Compact. Because we are conducting this public meeting remotely, I state for the record the following information. Access to this meeting is conducted by medium of interactive communication that allows members of the public without cost to attend the meeting through the use of the conference call and by viewing the board's YouTube channel. While the meeting is conducted remotely, the requirements of KOMA are not suspended. As such, we will be conducting this meeting pursuant to the KOMA. On December 15th, 2023, we sent notice of the board meeting to all individuals who had requested notice of such meeting. The notice was also posted on the board's website, ksbsrb.ks.gov. You may obtain a copy of the notice at that website. An agenda and other meeting materials have been posted on the board's website and are available for review. You may also request a copy of the agenda specifically by sending an email to david.fye@ks.gov with the subject line request for the agenda, and it will be sent to you. The notice contains information for the conference call and YouTube channel that allows the public to attend the meeting free of charge. The notice also states that if we have any technical issues during the meeting, you may send an email to bsrb@ks.gov. A recording of this meeting will be available on the BSRB YouTube channel following the conclusion of the meeting by using the link to the meeting on the agenda. And the conference call line is active. I did check it before the meeting, and there are currently no individuals on the conference call line.
Thank you for that. Our first item of business today is reviewing the board meeting agenda. So if you would take a look at the agenda in your packet that was provided, and if there aren't any other changes or comments, I'll take a motion to approve the agenda.
So moved. Second.
David, thank you, Jim. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed, same sign. Great. Next item of business, Tanya, we're happy to have you here today to provide your public comment.
Great, thank you. I'm happy to be here as well, and I hope you all are staying as warm as you can and safe as you can. So thank you for allowing me to make public comment. I am speaking to you today in my role, and some of you may be aware that I'm the current president of the Kansas chapter of the National Association of Social Workers. I started on July 1st this summer, and I was just asked and requested to come here today and just speak and ask you for your support of House Bill 2484, which was introduced as the compact for social work, the interstate compact with social workers. My intention was not to review what a compact is. My understanding is that historically, and I think I've actually been to some of the hearings where you have supported other compacts in the past for psychology and counseling services. And so I know you're familiar with this. I do have some information if anybody has questions. But really just a few of the highlights is that it really will assist us to provide continuity of services to participate in the interstate compact. And the National Association of Social Workers, as a national organization, has been working on this for several years. And we have a shortage, as many of you know, about providers, and social workers are our largest mental health and service providers in the state. And we would like to have your support in being able to extend those services. And I truly believe, I know I'm probably a little biased, I really truly believe Kansas social workers are some of the highly skilled ones out there. And other states, this would allow us to provide continuity care across state lines, be able to work with clients across state lines, and also really be able to provide services when other states really sometimes need us to be able to go there and continue to provide services, especially when they continue to have shortages in Kansas, but we have those shortages across the United States. And so I didn't really want to take up much of your time, but just to highlight that the House Bill 2484 had been introduced and that the Kansas chapter would like your support as it goes through its progress this legislative session. And I'm free to take any questions.
Thank you for that, Tanya. And members of the board, do you have any questions or comments for Tanya? You'll note that there will be later on in the agenda some discussion about the bill specifically, so the board can thanks you for your comments, and we'll consider those as we review that agenda item later on.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you for being here.
Oh, no problem. I will log off and I will look forward to watching your comments later in discussion. Thank you. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Okay, great. The next item of business is to review the minutes and approve them from the November 13th. Those were also provided in your packet. If there aren't any comments or suggestions for change, then we'll take a motion to approve when ready.
Move to approve.
Thank you, Jim.
Second.
Thank you, Cynthia. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed, same sign. Very good. Dave, we'll hand it over to you for your executive director's report.
Thank you, Mary. First, let's go ahead and begin with some operations updates. First, let's talk a little bit about outreach, and I'll give you the current update on the BSRB YouTube channel. For those who are new to following the work of the board, back in January of 2021, the BSRB launched a YouTube channel to provide better access and more securely offer individuals the ability to follow the work of the board at board meetings and advisory committee meetings. And since that point, we have broadcast live or uploaded afterwards 138 meetings. Those have been viewed over 5,319 times. And for board members, I know you've heard some of these updates over time, and just to kind of give you some perspective on these numbers, I looked at the meetings of the board during the last year, because there are quite a few meetings the board has between all the different advisory committees. So I looked just at the board meetings themselves. And if you look at board meetings, those are viewed an average of 84 times. And I think that's really interesting and really positive, because it means that people across the state are following the work of the board and are taking an active interest. And I know that has influenced some questions that we've received here at the office, but it's interesting when we see each other on screen sometimes. It's hard to know how many people are really, following the board and playing an active role, but knowing that on average 84 different people are watching the board meetings, that's really positive to me. So I wanted to share that with you. Another item in terms of outreach, the spring semesters are getting ready to start, if they have not already, for some of the schools around Kansas. During the spring, Leslie Allen and I, the assistant director for the BSRB and licensing manager, we routinely talk to different groups of students at schools, sometimes by Zoom, sometimes in person, if weather allows and schedule allows. And we give presentations. We talk about the licensing process to help make that more clear. We talk about disciplinary issues, knowing that a lot of these students will become professionals licensed by the BSRB, to help make them aware of ways that they can avoid disciplinary complaints in the future, and to make sure that they're following those standards and professional conduct regulations. And so we also offer information about tools available on the BSRB website, and just ways in which they can become a professional and a smoother process. And so we've already started to line up some of these presentations this spring, but we'll be even reaching out to more schools, trying to offer more opportunities for students to learn this information, and to give us a chance to connect more with the universities and schools around Kansas. In terms of another operations update, I just wanted to give you an update on revenue and expenditures for the agency. At the end of December 2023, We had year-to-date revenue so far, or fiscal year revenue, of about $408,000. Year-to-date expenditures for this fiscal year are $459,000. So expenditures are outpacing revenue. And just to make sure you are aware of this, that is by design. The board lowered fees back in 2019 pretty significantly, primarily on renewal of license fees. And also last year, the board took action to decrease temporary license fees. And so right now, the board is taking action to draw down the balance in the fee fund. But currently, year to date, the balance in the BSRB fund as it currently stands is $2 million, $2,037,000 total right now. So I believe it has been as high as about 2.2 million, and it is down nearly below $2 million. So the goal is not to eliminate the balance in the fund, but to draw it down with some of these fee decreases and then reevaluate over time. And just also as a reminder, the BSRB is a fee-funded agency, and so we run exclusively off of the fees that we collect. We don't receive any money from the State General Fund for operations, so we do need to be good stewards and make sure that we have enough revenue, even if there are periods of time to which revenue drops below expectations. And by statute, we actually do contribute 10% of our revenue to the State General Fund to fund operations. So just want to touch on revenue and expenditures, but we are in a good position currently, and that's where we stand year to date. In terms of some legislative updates, the legislature started their new session in 2024 this week. The State of the State address by the governor was on Wednesday, January 10th, and the governor's budget report was delivered to the House and the Senate, House Appropriations Committee and Senate Ways and Means Committee yesterday morning. Basically, for the BSRB, the governor recommended the same amount that we had requested and been approved for 2024. In 2025, there was a technical adjustment. There was a salary increase that had been put in for state employees last year for 2024. But due to kind of a quirk in the budget process, some agencies had submitted a budget for 2025, and some were only required to submit one for 2024. So when they put in that salary increase, they put it in for 2024 and didn't include it in 2025. Not to say that it was meant to be a one-time bonus, it's just the way the budget process kind of works. And so this year, there was a little bit of an adjustment to make sure that that held steady in 2025 and that we wouldn't have to, cut salaries for employees. And so it was a reasonable adjustment that is included in the governor's budget recommendation. And also in 2025, we had made a request during the budget appeal process. We currently have 12 employees here at the BSRB. Most of them are full-time employees, but we have one part-time employee. It's a permanent position, but that part-time employee has recently communicated to us that they are hoping to become a full-time employee when they graduate here coming after this summer. And this is an employee that we had hired a couple of years ago. They've been a very good employee for the BSRB, but the expectation was potentially after they finished their degree that they would leave and we would have to begin a new search for that position. But with this new communication and the opportunity to keep this employee and retain this employee, we asked the governor's office for approval to convert that from a half-time position to a full-time position, and they provided that authority. It would not actually cost the agency any money. We have a certain amount budgeted for temporary staffing, and so the way we would cover this is to shift that money from temporary staffing to permanent staffing and then be able to retain a good employee. So the governor did concur with our request, and that is something we'll be talking to the budget committees about coming up this year. Speaking of the budget committee, every year the BSRB's budget is approved by and reviewed by both the House committees and the Senate committees. The House has a standing budget committee, and for the last several years, our budget has been held in the House Higher Education Budget Committee. And so they review what the agency had originally requested, what the governor recommends, and then they have the opportunity to make further adjustments. And usually our budget is scheduled as one of the first ones up each year. And so I anticipate that'll be probably the first or second week in February. And on behalf of the agency, I will go in front of the committee, answer questions, and then if they have any further recommendations, the budget will move to the House Appropriations Committee to consider the recommendations of the Budget Committee. And then if House Appropriations approves it, it'll go into their version of their appropriations bill. Similarly, the Senate Budget Committee doesn't have a standing budget committee, so our budget hearing usually moves between different committees on a year-to-year basis. But our budget will be considered by a Senate committee, and I will represent the agency on those matters. And then if there's changes or anything additionally that they want to add, we will go ahead and move forward with that. And then it will go before Senate Ways and Means. They will have the opportunity to make further changes. And then once it moves past there, it will go into their version of the budget bill. And ultimately, primarily what the House and Senate oversee during this process is the amount that the agency has requested to spend from our fee fund balance. As I mentioned, we don't get any money directly from the state, but a lot of the oversight that the legislature provides is looking at our limitation in the appropriations bill. So even if we have more money in our fund, what the appropriations bill reflects is how much we are limited on a year-to-year basis in terms of how much we can spend. And so we put in a request for a limit, and then we do our best to have savings below that limit where it's appropriate. But we have to make sure that we have money budgeted for certain processes, such as disciplinary hearings and other things, even if they may not happen on a year-to-year basis, but it's important that we have those things as part of the budget process. So just kind of wanted to give you a high-level view of this process coming up over the next few months. But that is something we'll be going to the Capitol to be doing is the budget hearings. Additionally, in my role as executive director, I go to the Capitol at times to discuss bills during the hearing in front of different committees. And this year, there's two bills I wanted to make you aware of. One you've already heard about during the public comment time, and that's the bill on the Social Work Multi-State Compact, House Bill 2484. Additionally, there is also a Senate bill from last session. It is Senate Bill 37, and it deals with the Kansas Fights Addiction Act, which created the Kansas Fights Addiction Grant Review Board. And the primary takeaway from this bill, it's a pretty short bill, but for some of you who may not have tracked the origination of the Kansas Fights Addiction Act, this was passed a couple of years ago by the legislature. It established a grant review board to consider grant proposals from different entities to provide substance use and addiction services in the state of Kansas. And the original bill was limited in terms of qualified applicants to nonprofits and other entities. What this bill proposes to do is to change the definition of qualified applicants to also include for-profit private entities to the list of entities that may be able to submit grant proposals. So that bill is moving through the process, but I thought I'd make you aware of it. That is Senate Bill 37. So I'm not sure if it'll be scheduled for a hearing, but it has been moved from one committee to another, so I thought I'd put it on your radar. And then just kind of a note about the legislative session. During this time of year, things move pretty quickly. And so I do my best to represent the board as much as possible when we receive questions. If the board has not taken an official position on a topic, I tend to point to the discussions of the board at the board meetings that the board has taken official positions. But sometimes there are new bills that are introduced with very little notice and scheduled for hearing. And so there is an item on the agenda under new business, which I just always like to bring to the board's attention. During this time of year, should we get bills introduced, what would be your preference in terms of me going over and representing the board at those hearings? Or at times, what we've done in the past is we've scheduled very quick board meetings remotely to give the board an opportunity to review new legislation. And then if the board wants to direct me to provide testimony, that's kind of been the opportunity at that time. So just to kind of frame that for the discussion later on today, that's kind of how that works. And then on a weekly basis, this time of year, what I usually do is I send the board some just quick updates if there are meetings that the board may want to view on the legislative YouTube channels, such as the budget hearings or any bill discussions. I try to keep an eye on the legislative calendars for the House and the Senate and just give you some updates in terms of upcoming meetings or ways in which you can kind of follow what's going on at the Capitol. Moving next to another item under legislative updates, I have some very good news. As you may recall, we have had some regulations going through the process for a fair amount of time now, and the board has had a lot of good discussions on modernizing some of the processes for educational qualifications for licensure and things like that. And we had submitted some regulations just to kind of frame the conversation. The regulatory process, it is not a quick process, but what happens is and often the advisory committees will discuss a topic, make a recommendation to the board, or the board will make an official recommendation themselves to modify language in the regulation. And then staff from the BSRB will draft that, bring it back to the board for approval. And then once the board has approved that, we will submit that through the process. And that change to the regulation language is reviewed by representatives from the Department of Administration, and they have the ability to make comments or have questions and then send that back to us for edits. And so usually that is what occurs. And then once we work with them and resolve any of those issues or make corrections or edits, then it goes to the Attorney General's office for further review. And they can make comments or ask questions or make further modifications. And there is no specific timeline to get those back from either of those offices, but we do try to have good working relationships with both. But if the Attorney General's office does notice something and it comes back to us, it has to restart that process again and go back to the Department of Administration, in which they can make further edits or have questions. And so we've had a big packet that has been going through, and it has bounced back and forth quite a bit. And we understand how important it is to move these forward. We know that this will affect ability for individuals to become licensed. And so as respectfully as possible, we've been kind of asking for updates to hopefully move forward on some of these. And just yesterday, I received a packet of about 10 regulations that have been approved by both the Department of Administration and the Attorney General's office. And so they are ready to move forward. And what that means is, since they've been approved by both, we are able to publish notice in the Secretary of State's publication, the Kansas Register, that these are going to be open for a 60-day time for public comment. And so I talked to the Secretary of State's office yesterday afternoon, and they said that they could publish in the publication that will be on January 24th. And so we'll be drafting a publication notice. We'll be providing an economic impact statement to them at that time as well. And then that will be out there on January 24th. That opens up a 60-day time for public comment. During that public comment time, individuals can contact the BSRB with any comments on the proposed changes to regulations. They can also submit items in writing as well. At the end of the 60 days, we will have an official meeting at the BSRB office for anyone who wants to come to that special meeting and provide any further comment. During the 60 days, we also go in front of the Joint Committee on Administrative Rules and Regulations, JCAR, and the legislature has a joint committee which can ask questions or bring any concerns about those proposed changes as well. So really excited to be moving those forward. And just to let you know, some of those regulations that were approved to move forward, this has to do with some of the social work regulations that had to do with the in-residence definition changing. The previous language or the current language in the regulation does require that some, if you're not from an accredited program, some of the classwork has to be done while physically at the school, even though that was modified during this past session for social work. But this in-residence definition is also included in the packet to move forward for the professional counseling profession, the in-residence for the marriage and family therapy, and the in-residence for the addiction counseling. All of those are moving forward and be part of this that will be able to be opened up here very quickly. Additionally, I believe that packet also includes the recommendation from the board to add a national accrediting body for the addiction and counseling profession. And once that is in place, we will be able to move applicants from programs that are accredited by that national accrediting body more quickly through the licensing process. So that's very exciting as well. There's some information in that packet of regulations for the master's level psychology, which has to do with removing some requirements for programs concerning core faculty, as there's not a requirement by a national accrediting body right now for master's level programs. And so that should also help with more individuals being able to meet the requirements for licensure currently. So really, really pleased with this. This has been kind of a long road, and we have a few more that did get pulled back for more edits. So we will have additional ones going through the process, but being able to put these 10 out is really, really good news. And so I'll give you some more updates at future meetings, but really excited to get this moving to the next step in the process. Next update I'll give you is on the different associations that we work with. As a outside of Kansas, what we are generally referred to as is a composite board, which means that we have one board, but it is composed of representatives from 7 different professions. And the individuals work together with members of the public appointed by the governor to work on overall topics, but then the advisory committees play a very important role too, concerning each of the individual professions. And so some of these deal with some of the different associations we work with and partner with at a national level, and then on the state level as well. So one of those is a group called SIPAC, and SIPAC is a multi-state compact for the licensed psychology profession. SIPAC is a compact that we joined. There was legislation during the 2021 legislative session, and I believe January 1st of 22 is when we were first officially in the SIPAC compact, or it became effective. And there was a remote meeting for their annual meeting that took place on November 16th and 17th. I attended the annual meeting. The major takeaway that was clarified by a vote of the members is SIPAC is not a full authorization as far as a license. The SIPAC compact provides a method for licensed psychologists who are licensed in one home state to apply to the SIPAC Commission to be able to practice telehealth in other compact states primarily. There's also a way to do up to 30 days of in-state practice if you apply for that separately, but the primary method is basically on telehealth. There had been recently a question about individuals who have the ability to practice under SIPAC authority. Does that establish sort of a secondary right of other individuals to practice? In some states, you have individuals who are able to practice under the license of someone. And so there was a question of if someone has this SIPAC ability to practice, does that establish the ability for people to practice under their SIPAC authority? And that was not the intention when SIPAC was developed. And so there was a vote just to clarify that no, if SIPAC Commission grants authority for you to practice in a jurisdiction, that is exclusive to you and you only. And so there was a vote by the members, and that did confirm that that was the way that the compact will work. Moving forward, I did want to let you know here in Kansas, we do have close to about 100 people who are practicing under SIPAC authority. We currently have about 1,000 licensed psychologists, and as of most recently, we have 96 psychologists who are licensed here in Kansas with a home state license who are providing telehealth in other compact states, and 8 individuals who are licensed here in Kansas that are providing in-state services in other compact states. We have had a question since even before SIPAC became a part of Kansas, and that is how many individuals from other states are providing telehealth services into Kansas. As we're trying to talk about workforce and different things like that, if we have individuals that may choose not to get licensed here any longer because they're practicing under SIPAC authority, we'd like to be able to quantify how many of the individuals are providing services here. And there was a survey that was started in the fall of 2023 when individuals renewed their SIPAC ability to practice, in which they would have to inform the SIPAC Commission what states they're providing services into. And since that time, I have been informed they are collecting that information, but since they have not gone through the full renewal cycle, they don't have it for everyone. But when they wrap that up, they should have a report, and we should have better numbers in terms of how many people are providing services into Kansas, which I think will be really interesting. Another update on different associations is one of the other associations that we are a member of is the American Association of State Counseling Boards, or AASCB. And that association held an annual conference just earlier this week in Arizona. And I was able to attend that conference with board chair Mary Jones and also professional counseling board member Laura Shaughnessy. And I thought it was a very good conference. Some of the primary areas of focus at the conference included technology. One of the areas of technology was artificial intelligence and what role regulators should have in terms of practitioner responsibilities and confidentiality and uses of artificial intelligence. And there was also some good discussion on supervision and discipline, and also what other states are doing in different areas. When we consider things in Kansas, it's always helpful for me to have perspective on what other states are considering as well. Not to say we have to be in alignment with everything, but there's no need to recreate the wheel if another state has already come to a solution, or if we can share something with them, they can avoid some problems as far as that goes as well. So So there was a lot of good conversation that kind of started with us, talking about what's going on here in our state and then hearing from other states about what's going on in those states as well. And so those conversations were helpful. There were some conversations too about what technology individual states are using and how well those technology is working in terms of things like licensing systems, ways to track continuing education, things like that. So very, very helpful. But since Mary and Laura did attend that conference as well, I thought I would pause and see if they had any additional comments they wanted to share from that experience.
Go ahead.
Well, first of all, it was a great conference, and I'll say this, I think David gave a great summary. We also talked about jurisprudence and the importance of the benefits of jurisprudence for different states, especially the importance of the use of a jurisprudence exam now that the counseling compact will invite many states to come, people from many states to come practice in our state, and the importance of knowing the laws and the rules in our own state. Another thing I'll say, informally, it just made me so proud to represent Kansas, and what a great job David Fye does. When I hear how other states are doing things from an administrative or structural standpoint, I can't imagine how we could do things better. And I really am grateful that we have David Fye. He's the main reason I feel that way. And there are just so many things that other states bring that it make me curious about the possibilities of how we can improve some of our processes. So I have a lot of ideas for that, and we'll talk about that at the advisory committee. But no, it was a great conference. Mary, do you have
Thanks,
anything
Laura.
to add?
Yeah, I think I want to add something very similar to your comment, which is I think it's important for this board to know that David has a really great reputation among his colleagues. People they gravitate towards him. They have great things to say about him. And I think it's just very important to recognize that in our meeting, because I've heard it now when I was fortunate enough to go to the AMFTRB conference. And then this one, it's a resounding echo. The other thing I just want to reiterate from what Laura said is that there was a breakout on disciplinary actions, and would like to say again, just how grateful and fortunate I think we are when I hear about how other boards are comprised. We are fortunate to have a complaint review committee, special investigators, and even the way our legal team interacts with us. I think when I hear some of the structures across the country, it just made me very grateful that we have the systems in place that we do. So just some perspective for the board today. Great conference, and I'm sure we'll share more.
Well, thank you, Mary and Laura, for sharing that, and thank you for the compliments as well. I really appreciate that. Yeah, it's interesting. I have been with the board, or working for the board now for the past 3 years, and I was trying to be careful early on not to spread myself too thin, but I've reached the point now, getting connected with different associations and different individuals from other states, that I'm feeling more comfortable volunteering to assist in certain ways. And one of the unique things about this conference is I was asked to serve on a bylaw committee to recommend changes for this association. And I was not the chair of that committee, but through kind of a little bit of a perfect storm, I was asked to be the one presenting all the different changes for the bylaw committee. So I did take that role at this conference and kind of step through those. One of the items I thought was particularly helpful in going through that process was we had good discussions, and there's a lot of organization. And one of the items we were able to put forward that was confirmed by the membership was to add a new at-large member, which means we can have even more individuals from states represented on different boards of these associations and have an active role in the conversations and the way that we're shaping things at the national level. And I really do think, one thing that I am very fortunate about is having board members that are willing to attend these meetings and take an active role. I'm happy to attend on behalf of the board at these meetings, but it really makes me feel very, very good when I have board members who come out to these and play an active role and participate in the discussions and want to get more involved. So I want to help you in your role as board members with that too. But thank you both for attending. That was very, very nice. So moving on to the next item, let's just go to some other updates. I mentioned the Kansas Heights Addiction Grant Review Board. There is a item in your packet that is an update from Jason Hess. He has been the board's appointee to the Kansas Fights Addiction Grant Review Board, and he provided sort of a short summary of some of the recent activities of that group. And I also wanted to highlight too, back when this started and Kansas was asked to appoint a member to that entity, the board's decision was to go ahead and do sort of a 2-year appointment in terms of who would serve in that role. And then to consider it basically at the beginning of the fiscal year. So I know it may not seem like it has been that long ago, but we are going to be coming up upon that at the end of June. So just kind of wanted to highlight and just say, you know, at a future meeting, the board will probably need to have a little bit of a discussion in terms of, you know, do you want to do a reappointment? Do you want to open it up for any other individuals to be considered, or how you would want to handle that? But just kind of wanted to put that on your radar, and it's about 6 months before then, but I kind of had it as a little item on my long-term to-do list, and I wanted to make sure that it was on your radar as well. Next update is on the SIPAC Commission, but I've already kind of talked about that with the annual meeting. So I'll move to the next one, and that is the Professional Counseling Multi-State Compact. And I can kind of cover this topic broadly, but Laura Shaughnessy, I know you're our Compact Commissioner for the state of Kansas, and I know following the meeting from AASCB, there was another Compact Commission meeting. So before I kind of talk about this compact, I'll just defer to you. Is there any news you want to share with the board about the Compact Commission?
We mostly did training at the commission meeting. It was about 90% training, and we announced Greg Searles as the executive director of the Compact Commission. And that was a very emotional thing for him. He really is going to miss his old role, but he's excited about his new role. But it was mostly training. We have a really solid attorney for the commission, and she spent probably about 90 minutes just covering most of the rules. So there really wasn't a lot of new information. It was great to see everybody. I think we had 22 people in attendance from 17 states and about 30 online.
And Laura, I think it's about 31 states that are part of the compact now. Is that?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so that compact for professional counseling is not yet operational in terms of issuing privileges to practice, but the Compact Commission has been meeting, and there's a rules committee, and they've been passing rules. There is a discussion topic later on that talks about background checks, and that is something the board will need to consider concerning, you know, the requirements of compact membership and how that could affect individuals' ability to practice under these different compacts. And some of the compacts have taken different approaches to that language as well. So we'll have to talk about that a little bit later in the meeting. But yeah, it's encouraging to see these different compacts form. And Laura, I appreciate the role that you play as our commissioner and attending those meetings. And thank you for all the work you do in that role as well.
Thank you. We're just beginning.
Just a few more updates. So let's see. The social work compact, I did include a copy of House Bill 2484 in your packet. Just as a quick summary about that bill, the majority of the language in that bill is the same language that needs to be passed in every state for it to become effective. There is one additional section at the end that is a copy of the BSRB fee statute for social work. And so between the last meeting and this meeting, board members had a chance to kind of familiarize themselves with the language of the social work compact. And one of the things this compact does that's a little bit different than some of the other compacts is it really does establish a new license type. Some of the other compacts provide sort of a privilege to practice or specific limited authorization to practice. But what the social work compact would do is it would allow states to not only continue to issue their current licenses, which I'll call single state license, but it will also allow states to issue a multi-state license. And so right now, every state has certain jurisdictional authority. And if you want to practice in Kansas, right now, Kansas would say you need to have a license in Kansas. If you want to practice in Missouri, Missouri has the authority to establish whether you need a license in Missouri to practice or not. Same thing with Oklahoma and every state. However, under the compact, what would happen is that any of the states that join the compact, as long as you had an active license in your home state, you could maintain your one state license that is the traditional license, or the states would be able to begin offering a new multi-state license, which would allow you to practice not only in your home state, but also any other states that join the compact. And so the reason I want to kind of bring some of these details out, later in the meeting, you'll have some discussion about whether the board wants to take a position to request testimony in support of the compact. But just from a certain perspective here, currently right now for the social work profession in Kansas, there's 8,288 social workers that are licensed. But we do have a certain number of people who live outside of Kansas that get a Kansas license currently. And so of that 8,288, 6,494 live in Kansas, but 1,794 live outside of Kansas. And what I anticipate is that this compact will be very popular. A lot of states, if not close to all states, will probably pass the social work compact over the next few years. And when it becomes effective, I believe the individuals that are currently living outside of Kansas that are getting our license will no longer have reason to do so and will discontinue getting a license in Kansas. And I talked to the last couple of meetings just to kind of preface this to make sure that you're aware of this from a workforce standpoint. I think our license totals will drop. It doesn't mean we have fewer people providing services here. It just has to do with switching from you have to get a license in every state where you're practicing versus getting a multi-state license in one state, and then you can discontinue your licenses and all the rest of them, but still practice in all those states. So I think probably over the next few years, if we pass this compact and other states do as well, we can probably expect to lose out on the revenue from licensure renewal of those 1,794 individuals. And that is a big impact. I ran some numbers based on how much those individuals pay in renewal fees currently, and look to see across the levels of licensing, because we do have a smaller renewal fee if you have a lower level license for social work. But basically the amount that would come up for that is right around about $150,000 for a 2-year time period. So on a year-to-year level, probably about $70,000 to $75,000 per year would be the decrease in revenue if those individuals outside the state no longer renew their licenses in Kansas. Now, the way for the board to be able to mitigate this would be to charge a higher amount for a multi-state license. And I think most people would see that as something that is reasonable, because if you're paying a certain amount to practice in one state, but then you're told you can get a multi-state license and potentially practice in 15, 25, 35 states, I think most people would look at it and say, there's a tremendous advantage to paying more for a multi-state license. But right now, we don't know how many people who are currently licensed here would want to move to a multi-state license. So the social work profession, I've been working with them to develop a survey to try to gauge interest in how many people might want to move to a multi-state license. Right now, I don't have a strong recommendation in terms of how much higher I would recommend the board would set that fee for a multi-state license. But I do think it probably is going to be necessary for us to try to mitigate that loss of revenue because of the compact. But we may not have good numbers until we get the results back from that survey in terms of how many people may want to switch to a multi-state license. We won't see this hit in revenue right away, and we do have a certain balance in the fee fund, so I'm not concerned about us dropping so low that it would affect our operations. I just want to put it on your radar and just let you know that probably for us to balance revenue from a long-term perspective, this would be helpful to have some discussion when we get to that item about how much to charge for the multi-state license. In terms of the bill itself, the bill just sets the cap for how much the board should charge for certain fees. And so the specific amount for those fees would be set in regulation. So the board really doesn't need to come to a specific decision right now in terms of what the amount of those fees would need to be. Just want to let you know that if no change is made, that is what I estimate the impact would be over the next few years from this bill passing. So food for thought when we get to that part of the discussion. And then just wanted to put a little note here about regulatory news from other jurisdictions. Mary and Laura and I mentioned when we go to conferences, we hear comments from other jurisdictions about what's working and what's not. I do see across the board, there is sort of a movement towards electronic processes. When people talk about using paper, even the ones that do currently use paper for certain things, there's definitely a distaste for it, and they want to move to electronic processing. Some still do paper for both renewals and electronic. For us, we do mostly electronic renewals, although we do allow people to do paper if they still want to, but about 90% do electronic. We are trying to move towards electronic initial applications, but we're not quite there yet. There have been some delays in terms of moving forward on that, but that is one of our goals. But in other jurisdictions, that's something definitely, and then having more processes online. Other states are talking a little bit about artificial intelligence and how to use that, or if that's something they want to use. That's definitely not something that has been widely adopted by different states. But Florida has a chat bot on their website. So if you want to see what that might look like, you can go to the Florida Licensing Board, and there's a little chat bot called Eli. And so if you want to check out from perspective, you're welcome to visit that website and then kind of see how that's working. And they've had mixed results, but they have said that it is helpful in terms of once they took the time to set it up and paid the cost, it has helped reduce the number of questions they receive to their office. So something to think about there. And I provided some information in the rest of my report just on some meetings we've facilitated and then some other meetings I've attended on behalf of the board. I guess just one more item I'll just let you know about. Nothing that the board needs to take any action on, but with the winter holidays that have come up over the last couple months, one item behind the scenes we've spent a lot of work on here is to develop a continuity of operations plan. All state agencies were required to develop one with the assistance of the Department of Emergency Management. And so I did spend quite a bit of time behind the scenes working with those representatives, making sure we had a good process in place. And it's primarily in case of a disaster, we would be able to continue the operations of the agency. So we did submit that before the end of the year. It was approved. And so we'll still be working on them to make tweaks, but that is something we do have in place. So if you see any references to that, I wanted to make sure you were aware that we have that in place and it has been approved. So with that, I'll end my report and see if there's any questions.
David, members of the board, are there any questions?
Just one, David, with the compact discussion a few minutes ago, if people were not licensed here in Kansas, would we still know they are working and providing services to residents in Kansas?
So are you talking specifically about the social work compact or
yeah, I think so.
Yeah. So each of the compact is handling things a little bit differently. I can tell you what I think will happen under that. Just for reference, for the SIPAC Commission, that's the one that is currently operational. And on our website, we have a link to the SIPAC information for the state. And there is a link to a verification portal through the SIPAC website. And so you can click from our website to see who all is registered under SIPAC to provide services here. So if you go to our license verification portal and don't see someone, you can click in the SIPAC one and see, okay, are they authorized to practice under SIPAC authority? I'm not sure that the counseling compact has come to an agreement yet in terms of how to verify who's practicing under the compact. Okay. And then the social work, they'll have to make a similar decision, whether it's reflected on each agency's page or whether there's going to be sort of a portal you can access to see who has approval to practice. But that is a good question because we want to make sure the public is aware who has the right to practice. And if someone's not licensed in Kansas but is authorized to practice under another method, it is important that we make sure they know this is not someone who's just practicing with no authority. And so that is something we'll have to be working with, to do.
The other question I have is according in the state regs, I believe if you're licensed, an acronym or initials you can use after your name. If you're not licensed in the state of Kansas, can you still use those same initials when practicing in the state of Kansas? It would seem to me not, but I don't know.
Well, and that's a good question. I mean, the multi-state license, the only compact that uses that model currently is the nursing compact. And I'm not familiar with how that works specifically, but I would think you would probably need to designate that you have a multi-state license after the initials, just to give notice to people in other states. It's just we have not had this come up with the other compacts because none of them use a multi-state model. It's really more they have authority to practice under SIPAC, or the counseling one is not yet operational, but that's a good question.
I have a question.
in order to participate in these multi-state compacts, can we not say that for Kansas, you need to go to the site and register if you're going to be part of a multi-state compact that includes Kansas?
You mean to register on our site?
Yeah.
So the tricky thing, I think, is that there's nothing required, like let's say the SIPAC compact. There's nothing that says the individuals in SIPAC have to notify Kansas that they're practicing within Kansas. They get authority to practice in any of the compact states, but there's nothing where it says I intend to practice in this state or that state. It's just sort of open, and that has been a concern because then we don't know exactly who's practicing in Kansas, and that's why we were hoping to get the results of that survey, is to really know how many people were providing services here. But that is a concern. So I think the only way to know is just to look to see who has the broad authority to practice in any of the compact states, but probably we won't know who all is practicing here. Yeah, there's with the compacts, there's positive and there's maybe negative or concerning aspects of some of them. I mean, when every state licenses individuals, you have a lot more control, in my opinion. You have the ability to set standards for things like continuing education and other requirements, and so you can verify what all of your licensees are doing. These compacts, I think, in a lot of ways are beneficial. I think that they are good in terms of practitioner mobility and also the mobility of clients to be able to continue to provide continuity of care. But any of the states that join these compacts, you do lose a certain element of control as well, because you are agreeing to a standard across states, and individuals no longer have to do all the specific things they were required to do when you were licensing them specifically.
Dave, did they address any issues around disciplinary action or complaints by consumers? So if somebody has that kind of license but isn't in our state, who would be responsible then if a consumer made a complaint to follow up on that?
It's a good question. I believe for most of the compacts, the standard way they have handled that is to say that so the home state can always investigate because that's where their permanent license is. If the services were provided, let's say through telehealth into another state, that state would also be able to investigate it as well. Let's say if somebody was licensed in New Hampshire and they provided services into Kansas, if we found that there was a violation, we couldn't do anything with their license in New Hampshire because that's up to the New Hampshire board, but we could do an investigation and then bring it to the multi-state compact, and potentially, they might lose their ability to practice in Kansas under the compact, but we wouldn't have the ability to interfere with their home state license. But if New Hampshire took action against it and modified it, that could prevent them from practicing under the compact. That's kind of how that works. Both of them can work separately to investigate. There's also some language that talks about states can work together on investigations. But that's sort of how that generally would work. We have not seen a lot of complaints yet about people practicing under these compacts, but this would change things quite a bit. Given the number of individuals that live outside of Kansas, I think there'd be far more people practicing under this social work model than are practicing under the SIPAC model. So we probably would see more complaints than we have seen under SIPAC, I would think.
David, my understanding from the presentation we had on the social work compact was that the home state, or if someone was practicing in Kansas on a multi-state license, Kansas could bar them from practicing in Kansas, even if their home state didn't take any action, if there was a violation in Kansas. And then, of course, that's one of the questions on our relicensure questionnaires, if you have any complaints against you in another jurisdiction. So potentially, it could stop them from practicing in their home state. But we don't have to rely upon the multi-state commission to bar them from practicing in our state if they commit a violation in our state, because we are the state that's issuing their multi-state license. Is that consistent with your understanding?
Well, so each of the states that joins the compact would have the ability to issue a multi-state license to individuals that live in their state. And so if you know, you're right, and I appreciate you adding in those details, because yeah, if somebody was not living here but had a multi-state license in a different state, we could do an investigation and we would have authority to keep them from practicing in Kansas under that multi-state license. We wouldn't have the ability to restrict their home state license in their state, or their ability to have a multi-state license. But I think we would have the ability to say you can no longer practice in Kansas if we found that there was a violation. But in terms of their specific license, that's up to their home state.
And conversely, if someone in Kansas commits a violation in another state under a multi-state license, then they could be barred from practicing in that state. And when they come up for renewal in Kansas, the fact of a violation in another state could be an issue in whether they get their Kansas or their multi-state license that's issued by Kansas renewed, correct?
That's correct. Yeah.
Okay.
One of the quirks in this is that there's not a uniform set of unprofessional conduct standards. And so what one state might have as a violation under their regulations, it may not be a violation here, or there may be different language on some of those violations. And so and so there may have been something where both states are in agreement that this occurred, but given the nature of the differences in the unprofessional conduct, it just may not be a violation in one and it may be a violation in the other. So so there will be some continued differences as long as states all have different unprofessional conduct regulations.
Any other questions or comments?
I just have one more, and that's on the upcoming dates of note. Are we going to, do you want to be represented at that Behavior Analyst Regulators Conference in New Orleans?
So yes, this is something that came up in the fall. We were invited to attend a conference. I believe it's being sponsored by the Behavior Analyst Certification Board, or at least they're one of the associations working to put this on. And so they have offered to have 2 individuals from Kansas or any state come to this meeting. It's one of the first opportunities, I think, to have individuals come to an association for behavior analysts. And so, so that is something coming up, and here we could have more discussion about who all could come from Kansas to attend that meeting and represent the state. But that is something coming up here in March. So.
Okay.
Any other items for David? Okay, we'll move to staff reports.
And I don't know if Leslie has any additional comments.
I don't have anything additional right now. No, thank you.
I do always like to highlight our history of permanent licenses. We have continued to see an increase in licensure. So I think at least until these compacts become a little bit more permanent, we will continue to see growth. And I am hopeful, even after the compacts become permanent, maybe we will continue to see growth as well. I think there will be a change over the phase-in years in terms of how we're looking at out-of-state individuals providing services in Kansas. But at least right now, we are continuing to see growth when looking at all license groups together. So.
Okay, great. Cindy, it looks like you are ready to go for the
Yes,
CRC reports.
and you have the information. And I want to highlight one point, and you have the cases reviewed by the CRC is one of the documents that you have. And you will see for the last 2 CRCs in October and November that we have seen less cases. And that is due to not to the amount of cases that have been that we have coming in or going out. It's due to a temporary reallocation of staff time.
And I'll go ahead and just kind of add something to this area of the report as well. I think as board members, you know, some of you sit on the complaint review committee and some of you hear the updates at these meetings. And it may be helpful to provide some context in terms of the timeframes of our investigations. At the last meeting, I mentioned that we've had some changes in staffing over the last few months. The bill that passed this spring provided authority for us to hire 2 new licensing specialist positions. And after we opened that up to applicants, we hired 2 individuals that were already here working at lower level positions. They decided to take on more responsibility, and we were happy about that. But that meant that then those positions became open and we hired from outside to fill those 2. So we basically have had 4 different people in different roles. And the best way to train those was looking at some of the responsibilities that were allocated to individuals before some of those people took those roles. So we started spreading out licensing responsibilities and other duties. But it did mean that 4 people were learning new jobs, essentially. And then some of the people who previously held those were sacrificing some of their time to train those new employees. And so one of our staff members split their time between investigations and discipline. And briefly, we decided to go ahead, or I made the decision to go ahead and reallocate their time to primarily focusing on training for those licensing responsibilities. But that did mean that we would expect to see a delay in some of the investigations. And then I'm happy to report that since that time, we have been able to make a real push on those clinical training plans. That was one of the primary area of focus. And we are caught up now in terms of the clinical training plans. So I'm really happy about that. And so we have had staff move back to their original allocations of what they were working on. But there is kind of a delay in the investigations because of that temporary shift. But I think it can be helpful to kind of provide some context in terms of how quickly we look at the investigations. And I pulled some numbers that I thought I would share with you today in terms of how quickly we go through things, and then just for some context, how quickly I think other state agencies that have some similarities with us. And so basically on a fiscal year level, we try to track how many of the investigation reports are finalized and submitted to the Complaint Review Committee within a certain number of days of receiving the complaint. And so within 90 days of receiving the complaint, for the last 3 years, we've had about 23%, 40%, and then 24% of those complaints to the CRC within about 90 days. And that's a pretty quick turnaround. So most of them do take longer than 90 days from when we begin the investigation, collect information, get everything finalized, and they go to the CRC. The standard that we really try to shoot for is the 180 days. And we do track the percentage of investigative reports that are finalized and submitted to the CRC within 180 days, which is about 6 months of receipt of the complaint. In fiscal year 2021, we were able to have 72% of those to the CRC within 180 days. In fiscal year 22, we had 92% of those to the CRC within 180 days. And then last year, we had about 81% of those to the CRC within about 180 days or 6 months. And I do want to say I'm very empathetic to licensees that have a complaint against them. I know that it's probably very stressful knowing that there is a complaint out there, that we're doing an investigation. Our primary role is to protect the public. So I do want the board to know that we do need to take as long as we need to in some of these cases to make sure we collect all the information and have all the details necessary for the board to review it. But that doesn't mean that we're not sympathetic to the licensees and what they might be feeling during that time period as well. So we do want to move quickly on these as long as we're doing so in a responsible way. But I do want to let you know in terms of those time frames. So in looking at 6 months, the vast majority of those, about 80% on average, are going to the CRC within about 6 months. For comparison, I looked at the Board of Healing Arts and the Board of Nursing, and I have statistics from the Board of Nursing from about a year ago. I haven't seen their new statistics yet, but about a year ago, they were having sort of a trend. They try to get theirs resolved within about 9 months instead of 6 months. And basically, they were trying to get about 45% resolved within 9 months of the complaints coming in. And prior to getting to the 45% in the years that were before that, it was even lower in the 20% range and the 30% range. And they acknowledged that they were struggling with that to try to get more of them done. in a quick manner. But that was the time frame comparatively last year the Board of Nursing was looking at, trying to get about 45% done within about 9 months. And then the Board of Healing Arts, I recall a couple of years ago, their numbers were also fairly lengthy in terms of how long it took to get those through. Last year, they did not provide metrics on the time frame for getting those through the process. But I am aware that, and reaching out to some other states and asking them for context as well, they try to shoot for that 180-day time frame. So that is comparative. There were lots of caveats in talking to my colleagues from other states. They said, of course, we each have a different complaint process. We have different investigators. Some are through the state. Some have their own independent investigators. Mary mentioned, some of the different resources for other licensing boards. Some licensing boards have board members themselves, primarily in charge of doing the work of the investigation. And so it's not apples to apples looking at every state. But I do think right now, our numbers are pretty good in terms of getting that many done in about 180 days. I think recently things have taken a little bit longer than normal, but part of that is because of shifting staff resources. And now that we're back to our original designations, I think we should be good going forward. We can always get quicker, and we'd like to do that, but that's kind of where we stand today. So hopefully that's kind of helpful for context, and I want to take a little bit more than I usually take during this time period just to give you some of those numbers.
I would just add that some people ask why it takes so long. It's sometimes because people ask for an extension, because it's their license, and we want people to be able to answer a reply to the best that they can, because we cannot locate a licensee, and then also because sometimes complaints are very complicated. They're very extensive. The complaint or the reply is very extensive, and that's sometimes part of the process.
Any other questions or comments? Okay. Thank you for that report, and I appreciate you pulling together some information to share with the board. David, I think it's helpful for the board to understand sort of what timeframes look like, and it seems like every topic the board is interested in data output, so I think it's helpful to share those statistics. So thanks for pulling those together. All right, we are going to move on to the professions report. First up is licensed psychology.
So licensed psychology met on Tuesday, the 12th of December, 2023. And therein we had, a pretty extensive discussion or further discussion on the unprofessional conduct regulations. And we will continue to discuss and edit the regulations at our next meeting. We also had a discussion regarding regarding having changes in continuing education on continuing education regulations, especially in terms of lowering the number of hours that would be required for compliance. Thirdly, there will be an action item on our agenda today regarding PCSAS. So that's the accreditation system for psychology programs that follow a clinical scientist model. We'll be reviewing whether or not we would want for the board to move forward on recommending for us to allow for that accreditation system to take place here in the state of Kansas. And we will meet again on Tuesday, the 13th of February, 2024 at 6 p.m.
Thank you for that, Richard. Any questions or comments? Okay, social work.
The Social Work Advisory Committee met on December 5th, and we learned that one of our non-board members was resigning, that we still have 9 non-board members when 10 is the max. So there will be a notice sent out to licensees in April soliciting new members. David and Andrea gave us a great report from their attendance at the ASWB annual meeting in November. And we talked about the survey questions that we want to include on the survey going out to all the licensed social workers, which includes questions about who would be interested in the multi-state compact license. And we also reviewed items. Oh, I'm sorry. We reviewed final language on proposed changes to unprofessional conduct for social work. And we reviewed items that we will want to address in 2024. Our next meeting will also be on the 13th of February at 10 a.m.
Thank you very much. Professional counseling is next.
Thank you. We met in December. Some of the topics we discussed, we further discussed unprofessional conduct regulations. We discussed the educational review process. We had supervision issues that we discussed, and we also talked about agenda items for our upcoming year. And our next meeting will be February 5th.
Thanks,
Thank
Laura. Master's level psychology.
Yeah, we met on December 11th. A lot of good work. A couple of action items for the board came out of recommendations. One has to do with whether somebody having gone through an APA accredited LP program would satisfy the standards for LMLP. Sometimes people apply for that level of licensure. They may be all but dissertation, or they've completed all their coursework. Also a discussion about when and how often people can take the EPPP, that's the psychology licensing exam. Both those items will be discussed in more detail coming up. And we're going to begin reviewing the educational criteria for licensure, as we haven't looked at that for quite some time. We meet again February 7th.
Okay, thanks, Dave, for that report. And the next is marriage and family therapy. We did meet on December 12th. Much of our work that was on finishing the review of regulations for continuing education, as well as looking at members of the other professions serving as board approved supervisors for MFT. We did also continue to look at some unprofessional conduct regulations, and hopefully we'll get to some final places with that at the next meeting. And then we sort of teed up discussion around looking at the educational equivalency standards coming up. So we'll have that for our next agenda item, which will be next meeting's February 9th. Addiction counseling, your report next, please.
The Addictions Counseling Advisory Committee was unable to meet in December due to some last minute member conflicts. So I don't really have anything new to report. I believe we are at our next meeting, which we are still working to determine the date, which will be in February. We will be setting an agenda for future reviewing old business, but then setting agenda items and goals for the upcoming year.
Great, thank you very much. Behavior analysts?
Yeah, we met on December 8th, and like every other committee, we spent a lot of time reviewing our professional conduct regulations. One of our members who is really active, she's awesome. Her name's Christy Steele. She went through and put together some language and sent it out to David and I. She's very invested. The whole committee is really well invested. So we spent most of our time doing that. Looking at, we also had like continuing ed, documentation of continuing ed, licensing reinstatement, et cetera, location of client on the docket. And then we scheduled our next meeting for February 9th at 1 o'clock over Zoom and ended for the year.
Great, thank you for those reports. Next item on our agenda was a 10-minute break. It's 11:18 right now, so is everyone okay with convening back at 11:30?
Yep.
Great, see you in just a little bit. And Dave, are you just going to put us back in the waiting room?
Yes, I'll put everyone in the waiting room, and then we'll come back at 11:30.
Thank you very much. See you soon. All right, are we all back, Dave?
Everyone has been put back into the room.
Okay, great. We'll continue with the next item on our agenda then, which is our discussion of old business. And the first item there is supervision by practitioners from different professions for marriage and family therapy and professional counseling. My understanding is each of those advisory committees have discussed this item and I think are similarly aligned in terms of recommendation. Dave, I don't know if you wanted to speak to that or if Laura would like to speak to that.
I'll just say, yes, we're aligned in recommendation.
So it appears at this point from both the advisory committees that the discussion was feeling strongly that their profession should be supervised by the professions themselves, because each profession comes with its own lens and viewpoint. And so I believe the final recommendation was to leave the language as is. David, is that correct?
Yeah, so each of the advisory committees had discussed possibly changing the regulation. And I think that both members, or both advisory committees do have a preference that individuals training to become clinical marriage and family therapists, there's a strong preference to have those individuals supervised by a marriage and family therapist. The same with individuals becoming clinical counselors or professional counselors, being supervised by professional counselors. But the existing language in the regulations that establishes the high bar of extenuating circumstances, I think both advisory committees felt like that established a high enough item to meet. But in rare cases where there would need to be someone else by meeting that, I believe both advisory committees felt like that was an appropriate standard. So a very difficult standard to meet, but if it necessarily had to be, there could be someone from another profession if they did meet that extenuating circumstances standard. So.
Okay, great, thank you. Moving on to the next item, which is discussion of possible agreement with CE Broker.
Yes, and so you may recall that there has been some discussion concerning whether the board would support reaching an agreement to work with CE Broker to assist the BSRB in terms of the auditing process and licensees being able to track and maintain their records of continuing education. Just as kind of a quick summary, this is a company that contracts with licensing boards in several other states. There would be no cost to the BSRB. There would be no cost to individual licensees. Individual licensees would have the ability to opt in to use the services of CE Broker as a way to upload documentation of their continuing education. They could also sort it so that they could specify which records would go towards, let's say, the ethics hours they would need for each licensing period. And so that way, if those individuals were pulled for audit and they were registered under the CE Broker system, we would be able to review their records far more quickly. They wouldn't have to mail anything to the office or risk it being lost in the mail. And so it would help with efficiency. The way the company does make profit is that they do offer some optional services or higher tiers, but they're not required. Individuals could do those if they wanted to. And so the board had a presentation by CE Broker. They asked me to look into the agreement with CE Broker, and I've looked into that. I think I don't have a great number of concerns, and I think there would be a big benefit to working with them. Currently, the Board of Nursing and the Board of Healing Arts already have agreements in place to work with them. But I would, so with the board's support, if you were in favor of moving forward with an agreement with them, I should mention too, in terms of the possible language for an agreement, I reviewed that to see if there were items of concern. I also gave that to legal counsel for the board, Tim Resner, and he reviewed that. And if he wants to make additional comments, he can. And then I also reached out to the Office of Information Technology Services, OITS, which provides assistance to the BSRB to make sure that they had good standards for keeping the information secure that they would have access to and their system. And they had already sort of vetted the company when they worked with the Board of Healing Arts and Board of Nursing, but they also said that they'd be happy to work with us in terms of an agreement, in terms of the information sharing. But that's kind of, hopefully this frames it, brings it back into perspective. We did hear some information at the most recent conference about companies or other states that have been worked with CE Broker, and I believe most of the comments were really positive. So just want to bring it back to you and see if you would like me to go ahead and work with them to reach an agreement and then kind of put us on a timeline for implementation, or if you have any additional questions or concerns.
I think it sounds like a useful service that we could offer as to our licensees. I'd encourage you to seek an agreement and then I guess you would bring it back to us then, that final agreement, David.
If you would like me to do that, I could do that. Or
maybe we don't need to if everybody agrees, but that's my opinion anyway.
Do you need a formal action taken on that, or just a consensus from us?
Consensus would be fine. I know that there were some questions last time to CE Broker, and you'd asked us to kind of look through things to see if there's any concerns, but I think things look pretty good. And so, but yeah, if you had consensus today, I think that would be sufficient to move forward.
I support that as well.
As do I.
Is there anyone who's not in support of Dave moving forward with this? Excellent. And I'll just add again that had an opportunity to talk to several states who are using CE Broker very effectively at this conference. And it was just more validation, I think, of getting rid of some of the additional paper and work that it takes to manage, particularly as it relates to audits. There was some really good conversation. Okay, thanks, David. We'll let you move forward with that action. And the next item would be discussion on requiring background checks for licensees.
Yes, and so you may recall our discussion about this topic the last meeting. I included a copy of the statute KSA 74-7511. This is a statute that was passed back in 2016, which provides the BSRB authority to require fingerprinting and background checks as part of an original application or for reinstatement of any license, registration, permit, or certification, or involved with any investigation of the board as well. And it talks a little bit about how that process would work. These recent multi-state compacts, a lot of them, if not all of them, have a requirement that for individuals to practice under the compact, they need to have a background check with fingerprinting. The first one that we had joined, SIPAC, their rules committee established a rule that said states under the compact have a 10-year window to start requiring criminal background checks with fingerprints. And what they decided was during that time period, while states were working on the process and getting that aligned, individuals would be able to practice under the compact. And so we do have people from Kansas practicing under SIPAC. And this has been something on the radar the board would need to look at, but we had some time to work on it. With the professional counseling compact, their rules committee has taken a different approach. And so it is a requirement for people under the compact to have had a background check with fingerprinting. But recently, they provided some information that the way that they are interpreting it is they're not going to kick you out of the compact, but your licensees would not be able to practice under it unless you had a background check and fingerprinting. And so right now, those licensees for the BSRB do not. And so if the compact went live, they would not be able to get the privileges to practice in other states until they had that done. So the clock is ticking quickly on the professional counseling compact for individuals who may want to practice under that. With the social work compact, there is also a requirement of background checks with fingerprinting, but only one state has passed the social work compact currently. I expect a lot more will pass it this spring. I believe a sufficient number for their compact commission to meet and start establishing rules. But even after that does happen, there's usually some implementation time. So I think the earliest the social work compact would be live is probably January of 2025. And if that is the case, probably by the time they would be looking at states issuing those multi-state licenses, we would need to have something in place, at least requiring it for the individuals who wanted to get a multi-state license. So I just wanted to, as far as I can tell, those are kind of the time frames right now. Looks like we have some time in terms of the licensed psychologists. We have some time in terms of the social workers a little bit, but for professional counselors, this would be something the board would need to take action on if you wanted to make this a requirement. So the statute gives the authority to the BSRB to begin requiring this. But after that was passed in 2016, there was not a step forward to actually start requiring it. I have met with KBI to see what would be required if the board wanted to go ahead and start requiring this. It looks like the background check cost for the fingerprinting and background checks would be about $48 per person. Right now, some of the other agencies that do these types of background checks, I believe the KBI is actually the entity that does the fingerprinting. And then essentially the BSRB would collect the money for the background check, and then KBI would bill the BSRB, or there might be a slightly different approach, but that's kind of how the money would move. None of this would go towards our operations. It would purely be a pass-through, but that's how that could work. And then the information from the background checks, I believe, would be accessible through a portal, but I don't have a great deal of familiarity with that. And I've talked a little bit about this with Tim in terms of some of the information that could come from these background checks. And I believe that there is maybe a bill that might be offered this spring with some other agencies that has to do with making sure the information in the background checks is protected from things like core requests and things like that. But that's kind of where we currently stand. So I just kind of wanted to frame that and see what your position was and see if you had any questions. I realize this is kind of a newer topic, but as this is part of these multi-state compacts, it's becoming more relevant, and in some cases, like for the counseling compact, a little more timely.
Would it have to be something that we would require for all licenses, or just for those that wanted the multi-state? And that $48 would be in addition to the licensing fee.
Right. Yeah. So good questions. To my understanding, it would be for people who wanted to practice under the compact. So to have eligibility to practice, that's what would need to happen. Yeah. Now the board could say you wanted to make it a uniform thing for all new applicants to have this, but you certainly don't have to, from my understanding. I think it really relates to the individuals who would want to practice under the compact. They have to have this fingerprinting with background checks. And then, yeah, the money for it, this is totally separate from the licensing fee. The licensing fees go towards our operations. This would be a fee primarily just going to KBI for them doing the fingerprinting, running the report, and making it accessible. So it would be separate from anything we would obtain as far as our revenue.
Dave, how would that work for people in rural areas in terms of getting their fingerprints done?
This is Cindy. You can go to, there's different ways to get your fingerprints, but you can do it. You can go to any sheriff's office. There's like a list on different various websites that you can go to local sheriffs or police departments, and you can get your fingerprints done. And then you can also get a live scan where you can get electronically done. And so like other agencies already have this ability set up. So like if you put in Kansas Real Estate Commission, they already have this set up. So if you go to KREC's website, you can go and see how they have this set up and how they have facilitated this process. And so again, there's two ways. You can do the card, or it's easier to do it through what's called a live scan where it's electronic. But you can go to almost any local rural sheriff's department and they will do it for you. It just takes longer to do it through the physical, actually getting the fingerprints done.
How long would the information, do we have a sense of this? How long would the information be retained that we would get from, or that KBI would get from the background check? Is it something that would be retained for 6 months, a year? Or do we know that by chance?
I think that would remain in their file. It wouldn't be releasable under Kansas Open Records. But I believe that the information would stay in the applicant's file. And if it's set up properly, you may even receive updates if something happens, if they commit a crime in the future.
Oh, okay.
I don't know if that's how our account is set up, but I know that other agencies have that ability.
Really, in Kansas, so you can get updates on those as background checks?
So.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's right.
That's pretty good.
And I can tell you initially when the board did this, and, you know, requested that this be added to a bill. The cost, they wanted to lower the application fees before they implemented making all applicants do a fingerprint background. And then that was at the time when they were using money from agencies' fee funds. So we didn't lower our fees right away. And then when we did, then COVID hit and so on. And so here we are. That's the reason nothing was ever done initially.
And I can tell you just from my perspective, you know, there were some other states that are in a similar position as us that I heard from at this most recent compact. And I think, you know, these compact commissions do have a choice in how to interpret some of the language that is there. I think one of the reasons it's included in some of the compact language is because a lot of the other states already require this as a condition of licensure. And so for us to be part of these compacts and be in alignment with some of the other requirements, it may just be a cost of doing business in terms of becoming part of these multi-state compacts. And so I am empathetic to any licensees having to pay this additional cost, but I want you to be very clear, this is not something that would go to us in terms of us, you know, building a balance in our fee fund. That would be a pass-through that basically would just go to the KBI for whatever it costs to run these types of reports.
So for people that currently hold licenses, would that be, so two questions, would that be something that we would ask them to do upon renewal?
So there are some questions in terms of, let's say, the social work multi-state license. Basically, individuals currently have, you know, that are licensed in Kansas have a 2-year period of licensure.
Mm-hmm.
And so at the end of their license period, they could move to a multi-state license. And let's say that the compact passes, it's all set up and functional. That could be a way that it's handled. There might be people who would want to move to a multi-state license before their current license expires. And so, so just kind of the time frame is a little unclear in terms of when people would need that, because there would be probably some choice in terms of when people would want to move to that. So the language in the actual statute says as an original application or reinstatement for a license, registration, permit, or certificate, or in connection with it. So the language in here really talks kind of from the beginning of the process, but the language in the compact, those really talk about when you start practicing under the compact. So I don't know that we would be able to just make it a uniform requirement for all licensees who are currently licensed with its existing language, but I think we would have the ability under the compact to make it open to people who want to practice under the compact, because that would be something new for them. So it would kind of be a choice for them, but I don't know that the board would have authority to say everyone who's currently licensed, who became licensed and this wasn't a requirement, and now we're going to make it a new requirement for you. So that's kind of as best as I can read this and trying to figure out, you know, where we would fall on some of these things.
I know that Missouri requires fingerprinting upon the initiation of any license in the state. So just so you know what Missouri's doing. And then the other sort of comment question is, I'm pretty sure behavior analysts are eventually going to move to that as well, because we do have that national credentialing board anyway. And so if that's the case, so let's pretend like the behavior analysts have a multi-state compact. Would the fingerprint be applicable to both licenses if people wanted to be part of that multi-state compact? For me specifically, like for psychology and behavior analysis?
I'll have to look into that more. That's a very good question. And we are in a unique position as a composite board, in that we have 7 different professions and some people do hold more than one license, but I'm honestly not sure. I'll look into that and see if we can get some clarity on that.
Okay.
I don't think, like, if you had your background check done with the behavior analyst board, I don't believe they could send that information to us. I don't think they can share that. So you would have to fingerprint again for Kansas if we did this.
Right, but would I have to fingerprint for the behavior analysis license and the psych license, or can that one fingerprint be shared across within our agency?
Oh, okay. I would think that we could share it since it's the person rather than the license.
Right. There'd have to be a way to indicate it though on like the application. I'd like you to share
Yeah.
this with these other compacts.
And just to add to what Cindy said, I went to the post office and got fingerprinted for my Red Cross volunteer work. So it's easy to do that way as well.
Okay, good discussion. Go ahead, David.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I know this may be a little tricky of a conversation and knowing, what to require or who to require it for. If you'd like, I can start to explore, if you are in support of starting to require fingerprints, at least for individuals who would want availability to practice under the compact, I can start to look and to see if there's something that we could potentially put into maybe a regulation clarifying that for those individuals, and potentially exploring the possibility of seeing if we could have a temporary regulation. That's something we did for the fees in the fall. So that way we could start issuing some of those new license types under Senate Bill 131. So if that's something you're interested in, that might be kind of a nice first step way to approach this and explore what language we might need. And then if the compact does become effective for professional counseling, maybe we could have this put in place as a temporary regulation while we follow up with a permanent regulation. So that's just something as an idea.
Yeah, I'm definitely in support of it. I think we need to be out ahead of it, knowing that these compacts have been signed and there's more coming. So I'm supporting you in moving forward to the next step and seeing how all those things will work together. Other comments? Sounds like it looks like a lot of head nods, Dave. So
Yes.
okay, perfect.
Great.
The next item of business is educational requirements for the student temporary addiction counseling licenses. We've had some discussion in previous meetings, I know.
Yeah, and this is included in your packet as sort of a one-page handout. It comes from the language from 2023 sub for Senate Bill 131, section 23G to I. Those are the new sections that deal with the student addiction counselor license, or the student temporary addiction counselor license. And basically at the last board meeting, there was discussion about ways individuals can meet the educational component to qualify for this license. One of the requirements in that highlighted language talks about providing an education plan signed by an official of the institution of higher education, including steps to obtain coursework necessary to receive an addiction counselor license. And I believe the last board meeting, one of the items the board started to discuss was if individuals are trying to obtain a bachelor's level social work license, because once you have that license, you can use it as the educational component to test for the licensed addiction counselor license, whether coursework pursuing the LBSW would be sufficient as long as it's, meeting the other requirements here in the statute. So for us to apply that broadly to all individuals who apply, just kind of wanted to see if you had any further thoughts on whether that would be acceptable. It's not the most direct way that we had talked about when this was originally drafted, but potentially it could be a way for individuals to meet that requirement by going through the LBSW route. So I want to see what your thoughts were on it.
I just wanted to add that all master's level licensees can apply for an LAC as well. So if they were in their master's program, could they also apply the same way for the LAC?
And in case some of you are unfamiliar with how that specific statute works, it does say that if you have a master's level license under the BSRB, you are able to use that. Originally, the statute, I believe, said if you had a master's level or above, you could use that to test for the master's level license or above. And then I believe 2 years ago, the board requested language in statute that was enacted that said if you have a master's level license with a BSRB or above, you could use that as the educational component to take the test for the LMAC or for the lower level LAC, the licensed addiction counselor license. So that would be another scenario too, if you wanted to weigh in on that. And if you have questions, feel free to ask those questions too.
Yeah, I don't have questions. I think, you know, for what we're doing now, and I think the intent behind this student temporary addiction license is to get as many people interested in the addiction field as possible. And so if there's good education already coming into it, I think we ought to look at that as a pathway. Other comments, thoughts?
I agree with that.
Mary.
Yeah.
I agree very much.
And this does not necessarily need to require us to change anything on paper. This is really more of a, you know, in interpreting this language, sometimes it's hard to understand, and we want to have a clear direction when we are evaluating some of these applicants. So it appears there is consensus among the board, unless I'm reading that wrong.
Nope, I think you've got that correct.
Then we'll move forward and evaluate those applicants for temporary addiction counselor licenses or student temporary addiction counselor licenses using this kind of direction.
Very good. Okay, the next item is discussion on education requirements for licensing, including standardized admissions criteria.
So this is something also in your packet. I gave you an example of one of these regulations. I included a copy of 102-3-3A. This is the educational requirements for the professional counselor licensure. So basically, right now, in the regulations, it indicates that to qualify for licensure, one of the requirements from an educational perspective is that you obtained your education from a program, in this case, accredited by the national accrediting body, or you meet certain other requirements. In this case, there are program level requirements and there are coursework level requirements in some of the regulations for the profession. And in some of these program level requirements, there may be some outdated language that needs to be reviewed by, what I would recommend is by the advisory committees, but I wanted to kind of bring it to the board first, and then after the advisory committees could take a look at some of these things. For example, under this regulation in section F, it says, in order to be approved by the board, each educational program in professional counseling or a related field shall meet the following requirements. And item 1, have established program admissions requirements that are based in full or in part on objective measures or standardized achievements tests and measures. And I know some of the master's programs in the past had required passage of a certain examination to be accepted to master's programs, but there has been some change, and perhaps not all of them require something like that. And so there has been a question of, if there is a change sort of across the nation in terms of how individuals are getting accepted into these schools, when the board is asked to look at the requirements for licensure, if someone did not come from an accredited program, and then we were evaluating under these alternate requirements, if the program didn't require that, they wouldn't meet the standard. And the board would need to deny that person for licensure. And so what we're asking the advisory committees to do and make recommendations back to the board is on any of these program level requirements that may not be suitable to continue to include in these regulations. And so that was one example, but I think for some of the advisory committees that have not started this process of looking at the education regulations, I kind of wanted to highlight this as one of the example items of why we need you to go back and take a look at some of these things. We definitely want to make sure the public is still protected. We want to make sure there's good standards when we're evaluating applicants. But if there's any that might need to be modified, or language might need to be changed, or might need to be removed, we would ask that you do that at least in the next few advisory committee meetings and provide some recommendations back to the board.
Yeah, I think the trend nationally is definitely to eliminate entrance exams in a lot of master's programs. And, you know, passing an entrance exam probably really doesn't significantly increase the public safety. It's whether you finish the program and meet the other requirements.
We will definitely take this back to our advisory committee, and it will be part of our discussion next month.
And
Well,
so,
sounds like good action then if we take this back and be able to come back to the board with what the committees are looking like in
Yeah.
terms of feedback.
and I just kind of wanted to kind of frame this for you, but for advisory committee chairs, when we have our agenda planning meetings, we can just talk about this as one of the items for the advisory committees to discuss over the next few months. So.
Great, thank you. We are ready to move into new business items. And the first of those is a consideration of recommendations from advisory committees. We'll start with the first one we have, which is the Social Work Advisory Committee, who has a request to support the multi-state compact legislation.
And the one item I will say here, I've had a chance to review this compact, just food for thought. I think this compact would be beneficial for licensee mobility, for client mobility, in terms of individuals going to different states. I do think that there would be an economic impact in terms of us losing a fair amount of revenue from out-of-state licensees, and the board at some point may want to take a look at putting in a higher amount to start issuing these multi-state licenses, but this does not need to be part of what's actually in the bill, because the bill only gives the board authority to establish a fee for this, and it sets a cap. And so I think within that cap, the board would still have some flexibility in the future once we collect more information on how many individuals would want this kind of license. And so it's okay to go ahead and consider support for this without having all those details figured out right now.
Do any of the board members have further questions about the interstate compact?
I just wanted to add that I think it's appropriate for the multi-state license to cost more than a single state license. It expands a practitioner's scope of practice and client base. And so I understand it will likely be more expensive, but I think that I don't see that as a barrier. I think that's appropriate, and that most people who would be seeking a multi-state would be fine with that.
Thank you for those comments. I certainly am in support of us supporting the multi-state compact legislation. Do you want that as an official vote, David?
You could take a vote if you want to. What I am sensing is that there's consensus by the board that if this bill receives a hearing, you'd like me to introduce proponent testimony on behalf of the board in support of this bill.
Well, that was going to be my next statement, so perfect. Any other discussion by the board? Fantastic. Okay. The next items were under licensed psychology, and one was a request for support and recognition of CPQ, which we heard a little bit about earlier today.
And I did ask Leslie Allen to look a little bit more into the CPQ just in preparation for this meeting. Leslie, do you have anything more you'd like to add in terms of helping the board understand this discussion?
Yeah, so when I reviewed it, one of the requirements to become CPQ is you have to have practiced post-degree for 5 years. So anyone who applied through reciprocity only has to be licensed for 1 year. So even though there's a little bit a little bit of differences in the requirements that all the states have, I don't think it would be an issue because they will have been licensed and practicing for 5 years before they would qualify for the CPQ.
And then Richard, as chair of the Licensed Psychology Advisory Committee, I didn't know if you had any further comments on this item as well.
Yeah, I think that it would be advantageous to support Kansas being a part of the CPQ, because it's a great thing with respect to credentialing and banking credentials. And I think, what is it, David? 45 of the 50 states are doing it. And if we are a part of such a banking system, it could really I think, reduce red tape if our practitioners would want to practice in other states. So I'm in support of us being a part of the CPQ banking system.
Yeah, and if you look at your handouts, there's a couple items on the CPQ, one that describes it and one that kind of shows what jurisdictions accept it or recognize it at least in part. And it's a little different with ASPPB because there are Canadian jurisdictions mixed in as well. But if you just look at the states and DC, I think we're one of a small handful of states that has not moved to recognize the CPQ yet. So I think this would be something helpful, especially from a licensing perspective. So.
Is there consensus then that we should support this? Any disagreement? Okay.
I don't have disagreement,
Okay.
but I do have like a question because the renewal of the CPQ has been removed. And so, and one of the requirements to get it is that you don't have any disciplinary action. And I don't see it in here on a, like a quick scan of it, but is there a reporting process? Like, let's say, for example, somebody that is part of a multi-state compact and they're practicing in Kansas and then they have a complaint against them and they also have the CPQ. I mean, is there a reporting mechanism to say, hey, this person has a complaint against them now?
What I read did not include that. However, anyone who applies for a license, we would still verify each state's license.
Mm-hmm.
So we would know if there was disciplinary action against anyone.
Mm-hmm.
And they still have, even if they're CPQ certified or whatever it is, they would still have to meet the requirements of not having disciplinary action or felonies or things like that.
Right. So I'm just thinking, okay, somebody's CPQ qualified and they don't have any disciplinary action. And so now they're, they're practicing in Kansas and then they get a complaint. With the renewal requirement being removed on this, that means now that CPQ is in perpetuity. It just seems like there should be a way to report if there's a complaint against someone's license or an individual. That's just my 2 cents worth.
Right. My understanding though is that having a CPQ would not allow them to practice in Kansas. It would just allow us not to have to verify all of their information when they apply for a Kansas license.
Mm-hmm.
All of their documents and things like that. It wouldn't just mean they automatically could practice here.
Right, but what happens if, sorry, just to be devil's advocate, somebody's CPQ qualified, they have a complaint against them, and it's not, and we're relying on CPQ to validate their professional competence, and there's nothing in their file that indicates that they actually, have gotten a complaint because there's no place to report it. They got it after they were CPQ qualified.
I think they would.
Wouldn't we still require an application? I'm
Right.
Sorry, Cynthia.
That's what I was going to say, is that you have to answer that question on the application. And that's all we go by now for initial licensure, is just your statement that you don't have any complaints against you. We don't run a nationwide check to see if there's a complaint against someone in another state. So even though they have the CPQ, they still have to go through our licensure process. And
we would still verify with every state that they're licensed in addition to having the CPQ. And most states don't tell us if they have a complaint either. It's not releasable unless there's an action.
Yeah, the CPQ is about the credentials and banking the credentials that they've already got. It wouldn't necessarily, it's not necessarily about the like a disciplinary process or if they've undergone a disciplinary process. And I think that with this, another safeguard, and tell me if I'm wrong, Dave, I think that ASPPB, one would still have a complaint, not a complaint, but if one did have a discipline action taken against one's license, that would still go to the national bank or that would go to the national level at ASPPB, wouldn't it? Like ASPPB keeps track of that.
They can pull those records. There's the NPDB, and so it would still be reportable there if there is a finding of a violation.
So that may, Linda, that may also be a safeguard because ASPPB may potentially include that if ASPPB is associated with CPQ but not intertwined with it, that may be something else that could occur, but I don't want to be quoted on that as definitive word, as a definitive action.
Yeah, I think just from a high level, the recognition of the CPQ would put us in line with the vast majority of other states, and from a licensing perspective, it would help speed up the process for some individuals coming from other states. Just another way that they can meet some of the requirements and have us move people through a little quicker.
I'm definitely in support of it. Any other discussion from the board? Do we have consensus? Any disagreement? Great, thank you. The next item is supportive recognition of PCSAS as a national accrediting body.
And Richard, do you have any comments on this item? I can talk to it a little bit, but I thought I'd defer to you first if you want to address it.
So I am in support of recognizing PCSAS as an accrediting body. It has a bit of history with respect to how it came about and why it continues to exist and persist. It's largely based out of programs that adhere to the clinical sciences model of clinical psychology, and it has gotten a lot of steam over the last 10 years in terms of large research-based clinical psychology programs. So places like KU, but KU is not a PCSAS adherent. This is going to be an accreditation body that's going to continue to grow over the next 5 to 10 years. And a lot of the research-based programs across the country are going to adopt this accreditation body as their primary accreditation body. A number of programs are beginning to drop APA as their accreditation source. Ohio State, I think, has dropped. UC Berkeley has dropped. WashU has dropped. And a number of the flagship state schools are going to drop APA. So folks will not be able to be licensed if they are graduating from flagship state schools, and that could be a significant issue for those potential licensees once they get their PhD. I am in support of recognizing PCSAS because they do have a strong model for accrediting their programs. So those are my thoughts.
Does it have to be one? Does it have to be one or the other?
It does not. We can still recognize the American Psychological Association and PCSAS. We don't have to drop APA.
And KU is APA right now?
Yes, KU is accredited by APA.
Yeah.
as well as K-State and Wichita State, so WSU. I think those are the big clinical site programs in Kansas.
Yeah, I'll just add a comment here too from the licensing board perspective. I have reached out to representatives from other states, and the number of states that are recognizing both APA and PC-SAS is a growing number of states. I also have heard, and there's been discussions about this in the advisory committee, about how a lot of the programs are changing from coursework requirements to competency and demonstrating competencies rather than coursework. And so for any states that would let their APA accreditation go and try to meet substantial equivalency, it may be more challenging. But if some of these programs are moving from one to the other, recognizing PC-SAS would allow us to move those applicants through the process much more quickly without getting into an in-depth expert review looking at those competencies. So this would be very helpful for us, and it's in alignment with other states are trending towards as well.
And the states that are recognizing PC-SAS as an accreditation body, I think I read this morning that it's something to the effect of 50%. Those states hold 50% of the United States population in terms of the accreditation of licensed psychologists.
Okay, so let's get a sense of our support for allowing this credential or the accreditation from PC-SAS.
I'd be in favor of it as long as we don't disallow the APA, since all of our state schools seem to still be under that.
Yeah,
I
and I
agree
think,
with that.
is there anyone disagreement? Excellent. Okay, the next item is for master's level psychology, a request to recognize APA accredited education programs.
And Dave Anderson is the chair of the advisory committee. This has kind of been talked about just a little bit already today, but Dave, did you have any other comments you wanted to add for the board's discussion on this item?
No, I don't, but it made me wonder, given that we directly call out the APA accredited programs, given what we just decided about PC-SAS, whether we should include that in there as well.
I know the advisory committee for master's level hasn't talked about PC-SAS, so that may be something to kind of refer back to the advisory committee to see if it, I mean, yeah. we could go ahead and put this recommendation on hold and maybe talk about the next board meeting if we want, or move forward on one of them. So,
David, I agree with you, because if we're going to recognize that at the doctorate level, it would be nice if the two aligned. So if we're going to broaden our doctorate,
I don't, excuse me, I don't think that PC-SAS recognizes master's level programs. I think they only recognize doctoral level clinical psychology programs.
Currently, neither does APA. It's just that if someone's in an APA program for master's level psychology, some of the programs that offer a doctorate degree have a terminal master's in it, or you can request to have a master's.
Yes.
Or you can apply if you've taken your comprehensive exams in your doctoral degree, if you have all the coursework. Yep. So it wouldn't be that they actually accredit the master's programs. It would be that the people are in doctoral programs.
It's a way for them to get licensed prior to being eligible for their LP licensure. So some people, like, they've finished their degrees and they're doing internships, and those agencies often want them, if they can, to get licensed so that they can bill for those services. So many of them are applying for LMLP licensure. This is just a way to keep BSRB staff from having to look at every single one of those to see if they're meeting the specific qualifications. But it would say if they've come out of one of these programs we would accept that as meeting the criteria for an LMLP. So it would make that process smoother, quicker for the applicant and for BSRB staff.
I see.
So we'll take that back and just have a brief discussion with the advisory committee about PC SAS and adding that, because we don't want, particularly if there are going to be more and more universities moving in that direction, we don't want to create language that sets up another barrier.
Okay, great. The next item is the request to allow multiple EPPP examination attempts.
And this was something that was discussed by the advisory committee, and I believe it was what originated from this is it started with some comments from the informational forums that we had back in the fall. I believe it was maybe the employer forum. One of the individuals who attended said, you know, there are individuals who take the master's level or take the EPPP and qualify at the master's level, but ultimately they would like to reach the 500 threshold for the clinical license. But once you have tested above 400, you're no longer authorized to take the test until you have accrued your 3,000 hours and you're ready for licensure for the licensed clinical psychotherapist level. And they've said that the delay in time during those 2 or years or longer impacts individuals' ability to test to get a higher score on that test. So they have requested the ability to potentially take the test earlier than having to wait until they've meet the requirements of getting those 3,000 hours. And the advisory committee was supportive of this. I do have to say I've reached out to ASPPB to see if this was something that they would allow, and I have not heard back from them as of yet. So I think, unfortunately, this might have to be an item that we table at this meeting, just because, you know, I wouldn't want the board to take a position on this if it turns out that the providers of the test wouldn't allow us to move forward on this. So hoping to get a response, but have not got a response back from ASPPB yet.
Comments or thoughts on this from the board members?
Sounds like tabling is a good plan.
Okay, we will bring that back up at next meeting. Members of the board, I'd ask your kind of grace in adjusting the agenda for right now. I believe that we need to hold an executive session, and I want to ensure that there's ample time for that. It's about 12:22 right now. So if it's okay with the board members, I'd like to adjust where we are in the agenda and move to have an executive session for communication with counsel that could be attorney-client privileged communication. I think, David, maybe we would need about 30 minutes for this discussion, do you think?
That could be 30 minutes would be good.
What do you have another suggestion there?
No, I was just gonna say maybe 25 minutes.
25 minutes? Okay, I'll go with that. I'll go with 25 minutes.
I make the motion that we adjourn into executive session for a period not to exceed 25 minutes.
Well, actually, I have language here for an executive session.
I make the motion that David read the language that I was going to read, but I didn't have it.
Okay.
Please proceed, David.
Let me go ahead and I'll read this. Okay, so would a following board member like to make this motion pursuant to KSA 75-4319? I move that the board recess into executive session for 25 minutes and reconvene the open meeting at 12:50 p.m. The meeting will be reconvened remotely by conference call at 1-877-278-8686, PIN number 327072, and by Zoom as directed in the notice of meeting that was sent to individuals who requested notice and is published on the board's website, ksbsrb.ks.gov. The justification for closure is communication with legal counsel that be attorney-client privileged communication. David Fye, Executive Director for the BSRB, and Tim Resner, the board's legal counsel, are to be included in the executive session. The subject to be discussed in the executive session is attorney-client privileged communication. Would a board member like to make that motion?
That's exactly what I wanted to say.
Jim moves. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Cynthia gets a second. I just want to remind board members, we'll ask you to actually disconnect from the Zoom meeting. You do have instructions on the executive session information. So please proceed that way. Are all in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Great, thank you.
We will return at 12:50.
Okay, it looks like we are all back. Thank you for rejoining the meeting. In the interest of time, we need to sort of navigate the rest of the agenda for today. So we have, I think, Dave, what's your recommendation in terms of handling the other new business items in the time we have left?
Okay, so how about if we go yeah, how about if we go to item 10B? I believe there may be support for putting together a delegation motion in terms of helping us with direction for licensing. This has to do with, there's some individuals who their educational materials requires review by an expert. And in the past, the BSRB, if we had an expert report, we would bring that towards the boards and CAPA to review. But I believe there may be support by the board that if these reports come back and they're in favor of licensure or in favor of letting the individual take the test examination for licensure, then if there's no other concerns by the staff of the BSRB, we can move these people forward along that process. So I have a potential delegation motion. I will just ask if a member of the board wants to make the following motion. I move that for licensed applicants whose educational materials necessitate review by an expert, if the expert report recommends licensure or approval to take the licensing examination, and BSRB licensing staff determine no further issues need to be reviewed by the board, BSRB may move forward with the applicant's materials without the matter being reviewed by the board in a closed session under the Kansas Administrative Procedures Act.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? Okay, all those in favor say aye.
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 Any opposed, same sign. Okay, great.
And let's jump now to 10C. So this is kind of a big topic, but I'll just frame it for you and talk about the next board meeting. Basically, right now we have an existing licensing system. We've had a partnership with the Board of Healing Arts since about 2020, and they host our licensing system. Recently, the legislature passed a bill last session to create a unified verification portal, and as part of that, they established the parameters with the vendor to create a enterprise licensing system for state agencies that wanted to voluntarily move to that new system. That new system is with Excella, and currently there is an opportunity for the BSRB to move to that platform as well. We've done some research into the cost to move to that system. I believe right now, so just to let you know, we are currently paying about $73,000 per year for the hosting of our licensing system and for support in terms of anything like that. This new system, there would be an upfront cost, I believe, around $200,000, and then the yearly estimated cost would be around $36,000. So over the long run, it would be a savings to the agency, but we have had good partnership with the Board of Healing Arts, although at times they have encountered something a lot of agencies have with staff turnover. And so there have been some delays in terms of moving forward on certain projects. So this is an opportunity. They're looking to us to see if we can make a decision on it. So I wanted to bring it to you. I've asked the Office of Information Technology Services to do a presentation or invite Acela to talk about their system a little more. So that's probably going to be something for the March meeting, but I just kind of wanted to put this as an expectation and let you know this will be coming forward sometime in the near future. And if we move forward on this really quickly, if that is your position, we might be able to actually get some of the implementation cost, if not all of it, paid for through some of the pandemic money that is still available. But we would have to move very quickly. So no real action item, just wanted to preface that for you. And then on item 10D, each year there are bills that pop up. Currently right now, the position of the board in the past has been that I won't basically unilaterally assume your position on a bill and introduce testimony on behalf of the board. I will follow your direction in terms of, the social work compact legislation. If you ask me to present testimony, I will do that on behalf of the BSRB and the board. And if we have bills come up, we can do a quick meeting to get your input. But I won't go ahead and just assume your position without having you meet and weigh in on it. So I want to make sure that was still your preference for this session coming up. The only downside is there could be hearings, very short time span that we would miss the opportunity to provide testimony, but that's really the only drawback.
does our support of the social work compact include our preference for you to give testimony about it? Or do we
Yeah.
need to make a separate motion about that? Okay.
No, so the position on that I took as introduced proponent testimony when that bill comes before the legislature.
Okay, thank you.
But I just wanted to create that as your expectation. If there is sometimes an immediate hearing and they may even make some comments about, well, the BSRB was silent, you know, that's just the risk with having a board and trying to meet real quickly and get positions. And so you may get something from me that says, hey, are you all available for a 30-minute meeting? But I will follow that direction unless there's strong opposition right now.
Yeah, my opinion on that is particularly last year's legislative session, things come really quickly and we want you to be able to weigh in. And I certainly feel like you do a nice job of balancing, extending what you feel like you can say on behalf of the board and also being responsive to those requests. So I would say if you could continue to handle it the way you have in the past and know that from my perspective, you have the board support in summarizing our ideas and moving forward on a quick time, if it's time sensitive in the way that you have. And I feel very comfortable in that. I don't know if the board has any other opinions with that.
I agree.
I agree as well.
Well, thank you on that. I'll go ahead and do that. I won't introduce written testimony unless I have direction from you. But if there is something really quick, I will make myself available and try to answer questions or be helpful if it's in the best interest of the BSRB or the board. And then the only other item I think that was left, I did skip over this under 10BI. This had to do with the question that had to do with interpreting other related fields. There is some language in some of the regulations that says if you have a doctoral degree in another related field, you are able to waive about half of the hours that you would normally need to accrue. And there has been some discussion about some of these areas. And in evaluating whether something is in another related field, we kind of wanted just to have brief input by the board. Some of these other related field suggestions or ones that individuals have said this is not specifically listed in the regulation, but we wanted to qualify. Some of these have not had an internship. Some of them have not had post-grad hours. And so we've been wrestling with this and we thought it would be helpful to make you aware of this and just kind of see if you think those are factors that should be considered when evaluating applicants under this other related field. So, Leslie, is that a pretty good description of that topic?
Yeah, either that or if there's a couple degrees that I'm not sure about as well. We have a healthcare administration, healthcare administration and PhD in counselor education and supervision. I didn't know if those were, if the degrees that we look at for meeting that requirement of only having to do half the hours, if those type of degrees should include clinical coursework or a clinical internship rather than, you know, teaching or leadership type things.
I realize this is a curveball in the last minute of the meeting, but this is one of those things where we've had internal discussions here, and we thought it was kind of a gray enough line that we could use some maybe put consideration by the board or maybe some direction on it. We want to bring it to you. So. And if you don't feel like you can make a decision on that today, we could go ahead and bring that back. But
yeah, it sounds like maybe we need a little more information.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Then we will probably ask the board table that item, and then we'll bring it back at the next opportunity. And if there's opportunities to have individual applicants considered by the board in a closed session under CAPA, if it's eligible for that, we'll go ahead and try to handle it that way in the interim.
Sounds good. Okay, so it looks like we've almost concluded all of our business and we have some future meeting discussions, but it is after time. And so I want to be very respectful of that. The next board meeting date is March 11th. If there aren't any other final comments or concerns, we'll take a motion to adjourn the board meeting.
So moved.
Thank you, Cynthia.
Second.
Thank you. All those in favor say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you all for your time today. Appreciate your work. We will see you soon.
Hey, Laura,
Thank you.
sunscreen, Laura, sunscreen.
Thank you.
You too, Jim.
You too, Jim. Right up here.
Oh, no, that's a big hat, big hat.
All right, thanks
Adios.
everyone.